Modern sociologists have made some analysis of the function of secret societies in the development of man's modern culture. And while these findings are for the most part based entirely upon cultural factors, they give us some rather interesting information which we can enrich and enlarge through reference to a larger frame of research. First of all, a secret society is usually a group of persons divided from their contemporaries by certain obligation, private assembly, and addiction to a particular or special code of conduct. Such societies began, of course, in the primitive world. Early in the history of man's social experience, tribes, barbaric, primitive, savage, developed secret societies. These were particularly concerned with the over-concept of that time, namely the importance of certain rituals and ceremonies in connection with the building of the individual into his tribal life. All of the important periods of life were marked with ritual, ceremony, and symbol. And the most important of ancient ceremonies of this nature had to do with the concept of citizenship, as it was then understood. By certain trials, obligations, and revelation, the person was prepared to become part of his social order. In tribal times, he received the wisdom of his tribe, and he proved that he was worthy of that wisdom by undergoing certain trials, real or psychological dangers, indicating his heroism, his patience, his willingness to self-sacrifice, his dedication to the same principles which governed his tribal life. After his initiation into the secret societies, he became a full-fledged member of his community. We may therefore say that in this respect, the secret society was also the school, the university, if we may say such, of primitive society. Here, the accumulated wisdom of the people was made available to each new generation through ritual and ceremony.
Welcome. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the newest patron, Dwayne Cultgen. Welcome. Thank you for the support. Make sure to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/the101podcast. Also make sure to check out the Rockfin, rockfin.com/the101podcast. Posting exclusive episodes on there, exclusive conversations, post shows to all the Illuminati confirmed episodes, all that good stuff. So before we get started, I think there was some cuts in this episode here and there. Not 100% sure, but just in case, just bear with me, please. So without further ado, welcome to the show. 3, 2, 1, and welcome back to another episode of the Juan podcast. Don't have my typical setup today. I think this is probably my third podcast with this setup going on here. Not the biggest fan, but it's only temporary until the end of this month. And as always, follow me on social media at the Juan podcast, patreon.com/the101podcast, all that good shit, YouTube, TikTok. He's a fan of the show, and he says he's a doctor, but I don't know.
Who knows what that word is nowadays, man.
All right, we got Jon Victory with us here. He is an actual doctor, and we're going to be talking about a few things today. And I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the Oculist Order with an actual eye doctor, because everybody knows about the all-seeing eye, about the Illuminati, about all this crazy shit that we talk about. So, hey, why not bring an actual eye doctor that, you know, this is the whole thing, like the triangle and all this shit. You know what I mean?
I was testing people's eyes, and before I knew it, I was saying, hey, you got to look through, you got to find that eyeball right there. And I'm making triangles, and I'm not even knowing what I'm doing. So,
really? What can you tell the listeners what got you into the medical field and why an eye doctor and not an ear doctor or something else?
I honestly, I've always just kind of known. It's a weird thing, but it makes more sense now because I was growing up. My mom is an ICU nurse. She's about 40 years in, and out of Pittsburgh. Her dad, my grandfather, was a physician as well. So I was always kind of at the hospital, seeing them work, doing their thing. And from there, I kind of knew, okay, well, I definitely like medicine. I'm a pretty big nerd, so I was a big science guy in school. And I was at the eye doctor myself. I have contacts in from probably about second grade, maybe first grade onwards. And every 6 months, I was getting new glasses that were thicker or bigger or whatever you want to call them. And I was sort of wondering why this was kind of happening. And as I was growing through high school and eventually deciding what to do, it was like, well, you put everything from your experiences in medicine, you kind of get an eye doctor. And I just kind of knew eye doctor. I was fortunate maybe through junior, senior year of high school, and a lot of people are still not even wondering what they're going to do in college. I had that idea of what I was going to do. So then got into college, and then that took me to med school in Houston, Texas. I did my residency in ocular disease. I'm an ocular disease specialist. I've been practicing Dallas, Texas for the past 10 years, but then just moved back to Florida, originally from Pittsburgh, so I wanted to get back to the East Coast. Here we are.
Back to Florida. You've lived in Florida before, bro?
I've spent a lot of time on the East Coast. I haven't lived there per se, but I have a lot of experience going through where you are down in Miami and up. But I never give the other side a chance before. So kind of a lot of feeling and just the way that the world's been going with medicine, being a doctor nowadays, especially having a difference of opinion from the mainstream is hard to practice. And I got a lot of pressure amongst my colleagues in the Dallas area, and that kind of caused the wave of everything to crash here on the Florida side.
So how different is it? I've never been to, have I been to Texas? I don't think I've been to Texas. How do you like Texas better, or Pittsburgh, or Florida? Which do you like better? I've heard Florida and Texas are similar.
It's interesting, nowadays it's what states do you want to live in that give you the most ability to just think on your own? And that's probably Texas, Florida, and South Carolina. But a lot of people associate the state, but not the cities. So for example, downtown Houston, downtown Dallas are very large metro areas that are very heavily influenced by a lot of the mainstream of what's going on. So I felt a lot of that as the past 4 years started to bubble up. Pittsburgh, I love, is a small, hometown. It makes me appreciate that a lot more, knowing, what I know now. But I'm not a big fan of the snow. I'm a beach guy, so I'm liking it down this way for sure. So.
Yeah, fuck that snow, dude. I hate the cold. Never did understand it. I mean, I don't know why anybody would want to do that to themselves.
They just like wear it like a badge of honor, I guess. I don't know. But Texas too. I mean, living in a field, it wasn't really my thing, so I had to get by the water, and I'm happy to do that.
So we'll get into the anatomy of the eyeball here in a second. We're going to be talking about the Copiale Cipher, the Oculist Order, and the Oculist Order, and the all-seeing eye, because this is something, again, that it's all through pop culture. It's all through secret societies, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, Christianity, theology as well, and Catholicism. You have the Eye of Providence and all this shit. So I have here one of my favorite quotes from, obviously, The Matrix, Morpheus. What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. And whenever I think of something like this, I think of Descartes. Descartes had a dream argument, which is the act of dreaming provides preliminary evidence that the senses we trust to distinguish reality from illusion should not be fully trusted, because, again, there's what was it called, the awakening dream or some shit, where you wake up in your dream, like Inception. So you can wake up multiple times in a dream within a dream within a dream. So how can you truly trust your senses? Descartes had the evil demon idea that he came up with. Again, another Platonic demiurge concept, that this evil demon is controlling the simulation, if you will. And you have the brain in a vat jar, where everything that you've come to know is just your brain, and there's electrical signals being fed to you, right? I mean, that's kind of scary. You have Boltzmann's brain, which I talked about on a few episodes back, where through thermodynamic equilibrium, a brain can form in the vacuum of space and form an entire lifetime. I mean, it's a thought experiment, but I mean, if you want to believe in space, right? Let's go there, because I've ran into a couple people as of lately who really don't buy the whole space thing, which is cool. Hey, I mean, I respect everybody's opinions, and I reserve to change mine at all times. So we have Descartes talking about this. And the sense that we're going to be talking today in particular will be vision, obviously, because we're talking about the Copiale Cipher, which is it's the craziest shit, right? It took them so long to break that down. So I wanted to get, and feel free to jump in whenever you want to jump in, bro.
Mm-hmm.
We have here the history of optics, and I had never really looked into it, and me wearing glasses all my life. The first glasses, I think, came in the year 1200, the late 1200s was when the first glasses were presented. But I remember, I don't know if it was you that told me that you are able to train your eyeball to see again, but they just don't want to let you know that.
Well, you could train your eye like a muscle. Basically, I describe it as a muscle, just like any other muscle that you can train to get stronger, faster, more agile. In fact, that was my original kind of interest, was sports vision therapy, where you're training, NFL receivers' eyes. Adrian Peterson was a big guy on that. Larry Fitzgerald as a receiver, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, there's abilities to make the eye stronger and in many different ways.
But the actual process of vision, like, what is it that doesn't allow me to see? Is that a muscle, or is that a chemical reaction, or how does that work? Because I know they going with, because I've always wanted to do laser eye surgery, but I'm scared of, because of the symptoms that some people that I know have had. Like, they see the stars, like these little, the lights at night. And then they told me that at 40 years old, it's like flipping a switch. And it's done. So it's like you got to go in for a tune-up every year. And like, I don't know how. Because if you think about it, bro, I mean, vision is crazy. Like, I mean, for me that I've been seeing all my life, I can't imagine being born blind without having vision, or having vision all your life, then going blind from some accident. I think that's the wildest shit that can happen to somebody. Because, I mean, imagine not being able to watch porn or something. Dude, like, would you just listen to the porn and then jerk off? Or, like, how does that even work?
I mean, you lose half your money right there. You know what I mean? So the stripper that's on top of you, or whatever it ends up being.
So how does that work? Is it a chemical reaction, or is it actually, how does the eye work a little bit? We could just dip our toes into that.
Sure. The easiest way to describe it is a measurement, like you'd measure your foot to size a shoe to your feet. Okay. So you have long feet, you have short feet, you have long eyes, you have short eyes. And microscopically, on a millimeter level, our eyes that require prescriptions to help us see farther away are actually a little bit longer, at least what we're told in our allopathic reductionistic medical school programming, that the essentially measurement issue is what you're correcting. You're using that lens to either bring the light longer or shorter into the eye. And the basic way is light goes from the front of the eye, it gets directed to the back of the eye, shoots it to the brain. The brain then figures out those signals, like a binary code, of how all that light hits the back of the eye. And of course, we have the best computer in the whole universe, I guess, till we know of, that can synthesize all that actually in the back of your brain and then produce an image, which is reality, of course.
That's fucking and it's upside down, right? When it's captured in the brain, it's upside down.
So then we have the basics, we have the basic physics, but then you have the fourth and fifth dimension of it, where you flip and reverse everything. So what you're seeing is actually upside down and mirrored the opposite way. So your brain actually flips it the opposite way for you. So not only is it processing the vision at the same time, but it's also disfiguring it so it's flipped relative to you. And that goes into two eyes, binocular vision versus monocular if you're shooting a gun, stuff like that.
Wow, that's really crazy. Because how you said. Well, we'll get into it because I got a bunch of shit on that. So
Sure.
I just wanted to know if am I able to fix the way that the light hits inside my eye? You said that there is a way to change that, or only the muscles you're able to train?
So I would say, and this was my favorite answer in school, was all the above, because I am learning how much less I know about anatomy and about vision and about medicine, the more I'm studying all of this different stuff that you and I like so much. And the one thing with that is the medical school allopathic reductionistic method says, put the lens in front of the eye, the lens acts as a brace or whatever, and that lens acts as a prism, from Pink Floyd, and that directs and bends the light. And that bending and those angular mathematics go into it saying, okay, that's it. And the way that the eye continues to develop, that lens will change based off the size of the eye. And that's basically, what I'm selling to my patients every day. What I'm thinking is there's a lot more to it in the basis of nutrition. I don't know if you follow a guy, I don't mean to plug on here, but Wallach's Warriors is a big naturopathic type of nutrition-based, okay, don't take the petroleum-based pills, take the, natural-based substances to heal yourself from within.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, okay, as these kids, as you're developing, the breast milk that you may have versus the formula, does that develop something? There's a lot of how you develop in the way your spine and all that is, as well as how much of a visual signal you have when you're growing. So for example, you take Asian kids and for a lot of the Taiwanese families, just the way that their culture and everything develops. I mean, you're right here looking at notes from 6 months old. Well, that trains those eye muscles to focus in on there at a quicker rate. So there's been a lot of that with how much you place in front of the muscles as they develop. So this continues to evolve as I develop into it. So
wow, that's wild. So we have here the field of optics started with the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians, and followed by theories on light and vision developed by obviously the ancient Greek philosophers, the development of geometrical optics in the Greco-Roman world. And the word optics is derived from the Greek equivalent that translates to appearance or look. And optics was significantly reformed by the developments in the medieval Islamic world, then further advanced in early modern Europe. Earlier studies on optics are known as classical optics. The term modern optics refers to areas of optical research that developed in the 20th century. So we have wave optics and quantum optics, which I have no fucking clue what that is, but it's on there. The reason that I wanted to talk about what?
I said it's all the wave, bro. I'm just learning they're all wave particles. So,
oh yeah.
just like the ocean, just like the magnetism. But anyway, go ahead.
The reason I wanted to bring up optics was because I've had on the show before visionary artists, and visionary artists are artists who, it's in the name, envision something either through the use of psychedelics or meditation, and they paint whatever they're seeing. So they induce a trance by focusing on an idea or something, and then from there painting whatever they see. So I've had a couple of those on, and I have the book by Lawrence Caruana, which he's been on the show before. He has a book on, I forgot the name of it here because I usually have it next to me. But it's about visionary art and just the positioning and sacred geometry, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that stood out to me, one of the chapters in that was of a vision of optics. And I didn't know until probably 2 years ago or so. There were different theories of optics. And one of the ones that I found most interesting was emission theory or emission theory or extramission theory is the proposal that visual perception is accomplished by eye beams emitted by the eyes. And obviously this theory has been replaced by, it was worked by Plato and all these other guys, and it's been replaced since. But essentially the ancients thought that you were shooting literally laser beams out of your eyes, and whatever you were illuminating was what you were seeing. But obviously there are errors in that, and it's been changed. This is, what blows my mind, dude, about all this esoteric and conspiracy and all that, just the world in general, is that we're still using the shit of the ancients today. You know what I mean? Like the whole optics and all this stuff is stuff that they developed in the year, you got Pythagoras talking about shit in the year 400, 500, whenever the fuck it was, stuff that we use today. You know what I mean? Like, what in the world? Like the Egyptians, and then even the oldest thing that we know about is the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? The oldest literature that we have. But what was happening before then? Like, there could have been a whole nother, that's when you get into the whole Tartarian and
Sure.
Atlantis and all this
I'm
shit.
all for it. Yeah, all for it. You
Some
mentioned
people
outer
like
space,
that.
you know.
Some people don't. I mean, that's the whole thing about this conspiracy realm. And I was actually talking to Mark today and Chris, and I was telling them about how, depending on which theory you have, even within the community, people are divided. Like, that's the whole fucking, right? We talk about the lizards and shit. It's like, we're not supposed to be divided, but yet you're divided. It's the globers against the flat earthers. It's like, does it really matter? Like, does it really matter if the earth is flat or round? Is it going to affect your life? Probably not. It's just something else for people to fight about. And so that's been bothering me as of lately, but it is what it is. And so we had the emission or extra emission theory that you can shoot eye
Hmm.
beams out of your eyes and, see things. There was
Hmm.
a couple holes in that theory, and we have here later established to be rays of light reflected from it, entering the eye. So that's what we know today. That how you were saying, the photon enters the eyeball, goes to the back of the eye, gets interpreted by the brain, and then we're able to see. And this is why they say we see things as they were, not as they are, because even if it's the slightest amount of time, by the time that photon bounces back into the back of the eye, gets processed by that takes time, even if it's the smallest amount of time, which I don't even know the name of it. But I'm not seeing you right now, especially us right now over a stream. I'm not seeing you 100% how you truly are. There's a slight delay, and that's reality. I mean, there's a slight delay in everything when you're looking at somebody in face to face. As the photons interact and the particles interact, it's not 100% real time, which is kind of scary if you really think about it. We have modern physics confirms light is physically transmitted by photons from a light source, so the sun, to visible objects, and finishing with the detector, so the human eye or a camera. And the light from the eyes of some animals, cats, which modern science has determined have highly reflective eyes, could also be seen in darkness. Followers of intromission theory countered by saying that if emission theory were true, then someone with weak eyes should have his or her vision improve when someone with good eyes looks at the same object. So the way I took that was like, if I have shitty eyes and I'm looking at something, if it truly is laser beams that are being pointed at something, if you looked at it with your better eyes, I should be able to see it because, I mean, we're both lighting up the same area. So it's like my light rays aren't as good as yours, but as soon as you light it up, I should be able to see it. Obviously, we know that's bullshit, but there were the ancients. I mean, this is how it all started.
I,
And
I,
go ahead.
I didn't mean to, but I was going to say, I really think that there's a lot to both of them because, as I was telling you prior, you can look at the inside of the eye, and we can certainly share that on the screen here. It looks like a light. It looks like a light bulb. I was telling patients that for years before I even read about that theory. But I believe that also the reflectivity aspect of it, like you were saying, how Plato said like can only see like, right? So I view it as kind of a Wi-Fi source in a way. So you have the sun, you have a light source. That is the one source that you need to connect to the other source to make the connection, like to the Wi-Fi of you and I. Now that connection can be good. That can be a good, strong connection where you and I can see each other in real time. Or maybe there's something that I need to help make that connection better for me. So I have a better modem here. Maybe I have a hardwired connection. And that would be what I consider to be the glasses, the contacts, or whatever. But let's go back to, why did you even need those in the first place? If I'm born and you're born and we have the same development of our light bulbs, why is my light bulb stronger than yours, or whatever words you want to use? And that goes back into the maybe, is that anatomical? Is that physiological? Is that the realm that we live in? Or is that, the food that we eat? And, you go back into how the modern food industry has been manipulated and coinciding with the introduction of the Carnegie Rockefeller allopathic medical groups in the early 1900s, and how nutrition really delved off from medicine that way. So that goes back into that too.
Yeah, and I didn't think of it that way that you were talking about earlier about how even familial and cultural influences can affect someone's eyesight. Because I mean, you really don't connect those two together. Because eyesight is more of like I mean, when you were talking about it, bro, about putting some piece of something in front of the eye and the light, that shit is magic. Like if you really think about it, because like we don't know like light. Like I look out this light bulb in my fucking room right now. We don't know how that works. Like we just know we flip a switch and it just turns on and that's it. We look at something, either you see it good or you don't, and that's just the way it's always been. But if you really look at it, I mean, it's fascinating. And once upon a time when I was in high school, I wanted to be a cardiologist for the longest time. So I was in the nursing program at my school, and I did all that. And then obviously life had other plans, and I never became a cardiologist. So when people ask me about how I'm able to sometimes retain information, obviously I take notes, but also because I was in that medical learning, building a mind palace, understanding how to retain certain information for certain tests, which, I mean, as a doctor, even people who do surgeries, like you got to, like a surgeon or somebody crazy, they have to understand that not everything is going to be in a textbook on top of that. How you said anatomy changes. So when they're in there, they got to know what they're looking at, how they got to make those incisions and all that crazy shit. And I can't imagine having to operate on someone's eyeball or someone's brain or someone's heart. I mean, I wanted to be there, but I mean, never say never, right? Because life is like that and things are subject to change. But I came from that. I came from memorizing medical terms and things of that nature. And it kind of has translated into this whole conspiracy realm of things. And I mean, if you repeat things enough times, you start to remember them. So, I mean, there's always that aspect to it too. I have here in the 5th century BC, and I looked how to say this and I forgot already. Empedocles
Empedocles.
suggested that everything was made up of 4 elements: fire, air, earth, and water. He believed that Aphrodite made the human eye out of the 4 elements and that she lit the fire in the eye, which shone out from the eye, making sight possible. So what you were talking about was like pretty much like a light bulb, right? And we have here the narrative fallacy of the ancients, like, hey, this goddess was the one that actually made our eyeball. Like this is what's the eye in the Lord of the Rings? Fucking
Sauron.
Sauron, like like some
Sauron.
crazy fucking thing up the top of some
Darting
tower.
around and yeah.
So we have this guy, and then in the year around 400 BC, emission theory was held by Plato, Daddy Plato. 300 BC, Euclid, right, the founder or father of geometry, wrote Optics and Catoptrics. Hopefully I said that right. Don't fucking crucify me if I did. In which he studied the properties of sight. And then Euclid proposed that the visual ray emitted from the eye traveled in straight lines. And then he had obviously a bunch of geometry and shit like that, which goes above my head. And some argue that Euclid's version of emission theory was purely metaphorical, because he said that it traveled in a straight line and described the laws of reflection and mathematically studied the appearance of objects by direct vision and by reflection. So some people are saying his emission theory was purely metaphorical, highlighting mainly the geometrical relations between eyes and objects. So you're always going to have, again, these guys were almost spot on, which is what's kind of scary, that they were. I mean, if you really think about it, back then, I mean, not saying that you didn't have to work back then, but we don't have the distractions that we do today, especially, like you don't have fucking social media. You're on social media, I don't know how many hours a day or whoever, if you like a little bit here, a little bit there, adds up at the end of the week. These people, either you were a peasant and you worked all the time and really didn't understand like studying and knowledge and all this shit, or you were a higher up and that's all you did. You just studied and learned things for forever. So it's like almost like what Manly P. Hall did. He had 2 sugar mamas, and from that he was able to travel and do all this crazy shit.
Wild guy, that guy. Wild
you
story.
Imagine?
I mean, it's just like, you think fake news is a new thing. You think that a story embellished is a new thing. And what do we know about these 2 sugar mamas? You know what I mean? What more is to that? And how
oil?
Well, of course, but circulation of the press back then was the primary way of doing things, right? So it's just amazing how this guy blows up after that. These 2 unnamed oil tycoons that he has this supposed relationship with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wow.
I mean,
wow.
Yeah. No, I get what you're getting at. So we have here from 1011 to 1021 AD. And I put his other name, Alhazen, which is the father of modern optics. He published the Book of Optics. And this is the arguments against the widely accepted extramission theory of vision and proposed the modern intromission theory. So he was the first one to come up with the idea like, hey, bro, we got shit coming into the eye, it's reflecting, doing its thing, and being interpreted. He was the first one to come up with this idea, and it's probably one of the, I mean, other than Isaac Newton with the book that he published after that, one of the greatest works for optics. And the book, it was the first one to use scientific theory, and he has a bunch of different things in there, right? And there's I don't know if you know about this, bro, but do you know about the formulation of Alhazen? Do you know about that?
The formulations?
Yeah, the
I've not heard
formula.
of.
I think it was like the formula of Alhazen or something like that, where it was like some formula that he had. It reflects off the eye in a certain way, and I didn't get into it because I don't understand it, but
Some powers of positive integers,
some crazy shit, bro.
something
It's
like that.
yeah, the Alhazen formulation or something. Probably should have told you before the episode, but
I have Alhazen's problem. I don't
yeah,
know if that's
Alhazen's
good.
problem. That's the one right there.
Okay, okay. Yeah, something about mirrors, candles that reflect. Okay, so this is essentially, from what I can see from the figure, it's like the actual mirror reflection. So I think this is when they started really scheming with the optics of lenses and trying to use like an actual glass mirror. Because I remember reading prior to him, like in the Indian cultures and stuff, they had writings of these seeing stones or moonstones that they would shave, and they would what's called lathe, where you take a piece of stone and you're cutting away and you're creating that curvature. And that's where the physics actually comes into, because the rate of that lens's curvature in your glasses is the rate at which the angle changes. So like I said earlier about how the light comes into the lens, like the Pink Floyd prism, and then it gets bent into all that. Well, that is from that triangle shape. Well, if you do a different rate of curvature based off of like a C shape or a different thing like that, as the light comes into the eye, it will be reflected or refracted in different ways. So I think that's what they're using with that. So.
Yeah, I did not understand it, so I wasn't even gonna get into it. But
I probably what they're going with. So.
yeah. No, you probably understand. Did they make you guys study any of this shit when you were in medical school at all? Like about the
Oh yeah.
history and all this shit?
Not the history. Yeah, that's the one. The history and the business side they conveniently live out, but they start with the history when the allopathic side takes over. So you're basically learning about a big fight that happened between a doctor in New York City named Charles Prentice and another doctor, an oculist named Henry Noyes. And this was 1885 in New York City. And Charles Prentice was a self-contained kind of doctor doing eye exams and giving glasses and doing it all in one. Henry Noyes, as we know from that term, oculist, is probably from some establishment or whatever. And he
What year was
down.
this?
This was in 1885, I believe.
And they made you learn about this thing in particular?
This is where the beginning of the American Association for Optometry and Ophthalmology became. So just more of a dividing line between the medical and allopathic structures and surgeries and different things, and really just an effort to try to gain more patients and recruit more money, basically. So, but all of this prior stuff, like you had mentioned about Alhazen, or even George Bardish, who was one of the Renaissance guys that started the lens making in Italy and stuff like that, or even Babylon back then. They had some writings in the Code of Hammurabi about how to perform like an eye surgery, and they had a amount of money or a ledger. You know, if I do this for you, then you give me this much money for your eyes. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah. So not only have we learned about what to do, but also how to charge for it, I guess, back then. So interesting.
Yeah, because how do you even put a price on that? Like, hey, I mean, and bro, would you even trust anybody in the Babylonian times to work on your eyes?
I mean, you look at the early 1800s and you look at these oculists, and the admission into their society was to have a light hand, which is interesting. They were to use the light or steady or something like that, because one of their procedures was this very informal cataract surgery that they would do.
Yeah,
and
I got all that
all
here.
that. Yeah. So I just think that some dude coming at your eye with a scalpel is more of a horror movie than I would like. But then again, I do it all the time when I do surgery. So
was it John of God, the one that was doing the eye scraping? What's the purpose of scraping somebody's eye? Is that to take cataracts off of there, right? The stuff that grows on there?
when you say scrape, I mean, you have a lot of stories about like the Native Americans and stuff. They would use a lot of breast milk and tobacco formulations, and that would create sort of a paste that you would take off growths of the eye. Sometimes the UV exposure from the sun can cause growths on the corners of the eye to kind of grow over. That was a very prominent issue. Cataracts, of course, where they would push it out of the way. But the on top of, or the scraping, it could also be more of a, you look into scripture and how Jesus cured the blind and he spit into the mud. What was he actually using there? Was it a pumice stone? Was he scraping people's eyes away with sand and using it as sort of like a debriding sort of way? Because you do that as well. But why do all these eye problems form? Unless you're not really taking care of your eyes, they tend to take care of themselves. So a lot of trauma and stuff like that can occur too. So
that's wild, bro. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it's because he was spitting in it, and then how you said you can use that abrasive medium on there, and just massage away whatever it was, and then voila, hey, I'm cured. What's crazy is it probably didn't write about other people that Jesus tried to heal that he didn't heal. And then
you got that one guy, but the 11 after him, that's why there were 12 disciples, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they only show the good shit. They don't show the bad stuff. It's like, he had a whole case of malpractice against him. Like,
Manly Hall's got his oil tycoons running his business, and then, Jesus had the Bible running his, right? So
yeah, that's crazy, dude. So Alhazen reasoned against the extra mission theory, pointing to the fact that the eyes can be damaged by looking directly at bright light. So it's like, if the light comes out of our eyeballs, how the fuck can I not look at the sun? And you have people who say, "Oh, I sun gaze. I look at the sun." And I go, "Well, yeah. I mean, I know people who spread their ass cheeks and put their asshole so the sun hits their asshole. I mean, is that good for you too?"
Fifth eye thing or whatever. Yeah, sun in your fifth eye.
The third eye, bro. That's the third. That's the eye of Horus. So he claimed the low probability that the eye can fill the entirety of space as soon as the eyelids are opened. As soon as the eyelids are opened, as an observer looks up into the night sky. Using the intromission theory as a foundation, he formed his own theory that an object emits rays of light from every point on its surface, which then travels in all directions, so thereby allowing some light in a viewer's eyes. According to this theory, the object being viewed is considered to be a compilation of an infinite number of points from which rays of light are projected. And that's fucking wild, because this is the year, what the fuck year is this?
1100 or so.
1011. So this guy, bro, what blows my mind about these guys, because what were they, how do you even begin to comprehend some idea, some crazy fucking idea like this, like Plato and the theory of forms and things that live outside of this realm and outside of the time, the fabric of time and space. And one of the things that I wanted to get into with you is the observer effect, right? Because we know that matter itself acts differently when it's being observed versus when it's not being observed. So it's like, do the eyes have some sort of power that we don't know about? Because how you said, maybe it might be different than what we're just being told. I mean, the mainstream narrative will tell you X, Y, Z. But me personally, no offense to you, but I know that the medical system is there to keep you sick. You know what I mean? Not saying that there are bad doctors. I'm sure there's crazy good doctors. But if it's a one and done with glasses or something, you can't make money off of that. You know what I mean? You got to keep every 2 years I got to renew my prescription. I got to get a checkup. So, they charge me for the checkup. They charge me for the contacts that I get. They expire too, bro. They expire. You don't use them a certain amount of time. The glasses, they expire. Oh, I'm starting to get headaches. Well, you need to get checked up and need a new pair of glasses. Well, it's like, plus they put on all the blue lights and all of our stuff on all our screens at all times. We're looking at a fucking screen, bro. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's this Ouroboros, this system that they create in order to keep us coming back. And dude, I mean, look at Big Pharma, dude. My dad's got MS, And you know how much his treatment is per month? It's like $30,000 to $40,000 a month for a 30-day supply for the rest of his life.
If it works, yes, man.
And we don't even know if
And
it works.
and yeah, man. You know, you look at this is kind of the thing that I was talking about, is how in the past 5 years I learned less than I know about more than I thought I know. And it's a weird statement, but the point is the more you delve into this allopathic reductionistic medical program that you're taught, it's a very base level of anatomy and physiology that you can, as a doctor, choose to delve into it more, which you took an oath to, or you can sort of just stay in this commercialized surface level accessory driven mindset where everything deteriorates, everything has an expiration, everything is constantly preventative maintenance instead of actual prevention and in making sure that it starts from the ground up. I can't tell you how many patients coming in for chronic dry eyes and allergies, and they've been to 5 doctors, 6 doctors that prescribe them a drop. Here, you've been to the eye doctor. Hey, take this drop, it's fine. Take this drop, it's fine. When in reality, it's dryness and allergies that are caused by a chronic psoriatic knee that a volleyball player had an injury from back in college. And she's had an arthritic knee for 10 years. And every time her arthritis in her knee acts up, it creates a reactive arthritis in her eye. And that creates this seasonal allergy, eye-related issue.
You can get arthritis in your eye?
Oh, it all connects, my friend. It all connects. That's one of the other reasons that I really like the eye as well, is because I can tell about your toes by looking in your eyes. I can tell you about the back of your brain by looking at the front of your brain. I can't tell you how many patients I have conversations about their upset stomach and their eyes and how that connects, and how cataracts are caused, by looking at the sun. Sun gazing is actually a good thing. Low amounts of UV are actually beneficial to cellular activity. High amounts
directly
of UV,
though, is that okay?
It's all about the angle. So when you're looking at, like right now, it's sort of sundownish. If you have about 15 degrees from the horizon, which is basically if you just kind of go like that, you'll notice. Don't pull a Donald Trump looking at the eclipse without anything, okay? But the point is that everything that they make us afraid of, UV light, bacteria on our skin, sanitizing our hands, how much have we done that nowadays? It really, you just got to flip everything. That's what I've learned. I've learned that we're electric beings with an electric potential that are affected by magnetic fields, and that's everybody. We all have a charge to us, and we're not told about this charge. We're not told about how to direct it, and that's what you came back and you said. I think that's where the secret is. We got to learn more about that kind of stuff. I take pride in learning about doctors like William Rife and the Rife therapies with sound and how cool we can affect cancer cells.
Is it William Rice?
Rife, R-I-F-E, Rife therapy, pulsing sounds into cancer cells and breaking them out with sound instead of using, invasive tumor methods of removal, stuff like that. When I do cataract surgery, it used to be a very, very invasive procedure where I'd have to cut the entire side of your eye open. And now we only use a small incision with a laser. Well, why don't we break that up with even a crystal or use something even more or less invasive, right? So it's a long road, but it's more interesting when you learn about it this way than you just open up a textbook. So.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why I wanted to have you on, bro, because I wouldn't have known any of this shit if it wasn't for you. So I have here the anatomy of the eye and what is an oculist, and is that the modern day term for it? Do they still call them oculists or optometrists? Is that how you say it?
So there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of turf war. And you've heard of ophthalmologists, you've heard of optometrists, and of course we learned oculist, which was new to me when we first started talking. And I think it's all interchangeable, because back when it was in Babylonian times, whatever you want to call it, an oculist, to up to essentially I have as early as about the 1890s, when it kind of got flipped into this optometrist, ophthalmologist, and that was really, I think, the introduction of the allopathic system, like I said, based off of the petroleum, Rockefeller, Carnegie influence, that they went to the first 13 med schools in the country and they said, we're going to do it this, and this way, and we're going to do everything. They threw out 3,000 years of Western medicine.
You keep saying petroleum. What do you Are you the one? Do you subscribe to that idea that petroleum is used in everything, so it's
Absolutely.
pushed in everything, and the lizards are out to make a bunch of money from it?
It's in the plastic on my headphones. It's in the microplastics that are in the aerosols that are dumped on us in the atmosphere. It is in the graphene that has been injected into people that took that jab. Hopefully you didn't, if you're listening and you want to have kids. And it's all the above. I hate to say it that way. I know it's a basic answer, but it's true. I subscribe to any product that I've had to prescribe. The representatives of that big pharma agency, the only ones that come back and talk to me every month, are those the ones for the 3 day antibiotic that I put you on for an eye infection, or is it for the products for the chronic severe glaucoma that my poor, lovely grandma patient has to take every 3 weeks? That runs out, that expires. It has all of those things you just told me about the accessories. Well, they treat medicine as an accessory just as well, right? Why can you pay out of pocket for a burger at Burger King and you can pay out of pocket for medicine that saves your dad for MS? It just, it's just this.
Well, they wouldn't let him. They wouldn't let him buy it. I mean, but continue. I'll tell you after. They wouldn't let him buy it. But uh, this idea that is it true that some of these companies give doctors incentives to push their products? I've heard people they get a prescription, so the doctor steps out. They just so happen to be visited by somebody from a different company. Doctor comes in with a new script, like, oh no, he used this instead. It's like,
I
fuck.
haven't had any personal experience with that kind of weirdness, but I can say that there are definitely doctors I've worked with that will choose products a little bit more regularly than the other product based off of their interactions with those individuals. Now, fortunately, in the eye, I am in a type of setting where I'm not dealing with a lot of means with no ends. Typically, it's a see problem, fix problem kind of thing, whether it's glasses or a piece of metal stuck in your eye or a cataract. The long-term kind of conditions, glaucoma being the very well-known one, I think is treated completely wrong, to be honest with you. We only know one thing, and that's the pressure of your eyes, like a blood pressure in your body. And we don't even know what controls that. But we know in glaucoma, it's supposedly too high, kind of like high blood pressure. Well, high blood pressure is another example, like my dad. I would rather he go work out and try to run that high blood pressure down than just take a petroleum based pill that is designed to not only interact with your enzymes of your liver incorrectly, but also influence the uptake of different hormones in your body and express them differently. So, by that uptake of something and that expression in an outward incorrect way, you're interacting with that magnetic and electrical field in an opposite way, like I told you. So, from a very, very
Mm,
small cellular level, you're already doing it the wrong way, in my opinion. So,
wow.
any type of chronic medicine, right? Even if it's an allergy med, even if it's all of us in this generation are on some sort of petroleum, Zoloft or a anti-anxiety, or everybody, all my friends are on Addy. You know what I mean? They want to stay on their computer. That's all. That's all the same thing. That's all just to kind of get you fried in a different way.
What do you think about marijuana? Because I know glaucoma, one of the main things is a prescription for weed.
So I am a huge proponent of it, and I personally, it's all anecdotal stuff. I can only tell you how it's made me feel, but from a physical, mental, and emotional standpoint of how it was learning all of the bullshit that I had to go through the past 3 years trying to practice and just dealing with colleagues of mine, just like I told you when I first reached out to you, completely flip and switch. And, friends of mine getting Bell's palsy from getting the jab, or I've already had some patients that have had some miscarriage issues, et cetera. This is a lot. And the
Mm,
only thing I really had to come home to, instead of looking at your pretty face on YouTube, was to be able to kind of just relax. And that was the only thing that really helps and is still helping, rather than some prescription petroleum based pill that I have to take twice a day. I'd rather
yeah,
take the plant that grows out of the ground.
and dude, it's just that, right? It's a plant that grows from soil, water, and sunlight, and that's bad. That and then it just so happens to be that either when you ingest it a certain way or when you light it up and you inhale the smoke, you just happen to feel certain things, some of which are medicinal, 100%. But that's been outlawed. And when my dad first got his diagnosis, right, because we thought it had been a stroke, he's diabetic too. He just had a heart attack 2 years ago now. So he's got all these health issues, right? And one of the things was when they gave him the diagnosis, the doctor even told him, he's like, "Hey, we're 85% sure this is what you got." It's like, "Wait, what? What do you mean 85%?" My dad didn't have health insurance at the time when he first got diagnosed. So my dad's like, "Hey, give me a script so I can go and get the prescription." It's not a prescription; it's a treatment. So it's different than a prescription. You can, refill a prescription. This is a treatment that is done a completely different way. And the guy wouldn't tell him how much it was. Oh, well, how much is it? Now, literally to my dad's face, he told him, you wouldn't be able to afford it even if I told you how much it would be. My dad looked at the guy. He's like, how do you know what I can fucking afford and what I can't afford? That's my business. You don't know me. Oh, and he's like, no, it's very expensive, very expensive. You're not giving. Long story short, we found out how much it was. We found out how much they sell it to the company that sells it. So, because one of my dad's friends, his wife is I guess a broker or somebody for medicine. They sell it to the insurance or whoever it was that distributes it for $600 a piece for the generic brand. They turn around and they sell it to people for the cheapest that we were able to find, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000. But depending on which brand you get, and depending on which method, either orally or injection, there are some that were $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, depending on which you wanted to take. My dad opted for the injection, so it was a little bit more, but you could have taken, the generic pill or whatever it was. And again, who the fucking bro, for the rest of your life, every single month, if you have to fork up $20,000, $30,000, and the thing is, you don't have to take it. It's cool if you don't take it. If you don't take it, that's fine. The doctor was like, hey, if you don't take it, we'll see you in a few months in a wheelchair. It's like, wait, what? So they implant, right? They implant this idea into people's brains like a parasite. It's a fucking parasite. These people are vampires. They're psychic vampires. They implant themselves in there. And why is it, bro? I mean, you being in the medical field, why is it that people, when they learn that they have a certain disease, they die quicker than when they didn't know that they had a certain disease?
When you get the flu, right? When you last had an upper respiratory infection, you were down, you were stressed out, your eyelid was twitching, something was off in that magnetic and that electrical field of yours. And you said it best yourself that the reality realm, the phrase that we live in is when you're sick, oh, you got to go get to the doctor, you got to go take something, you got to go, you're sick, you're down, you got to stay away. And that all adds up. And there's an absolute mental component to it of, okay, I'm not going to be feeling that good, but if I keep telling myself that, I'm not going to feel any better, right? So the sort of conveyor belt aspect of it is when you come into these specialists, they are in that myopic, or which means short-sighted, which means very small, sort of viewpoint in their entire way of practicing. So they see this problem, they know that there's X amount of ways to fix it per se that go along with the standard literature that the people above them that trained them went through, and they would not dare break out of that system because as soon as they do so, whether they have the good intentions or not, even if they were to make more money by upselling and saying, well, we prefer the injection that's 4 times a month rather than twice a month because of the expediency, or they'd make some BS up. The other aspect of it is, well, their peers may not use that method as much. So they would say, well, why is Dr. So-and-so doing that? That's not up to standard of care. Standard of care is standard of care. And then you go back to these institutionalized methods of deciding these things. And it goes back to, this is the way Pythagoras determined the Pythagorean theorem because this is his theory. Now, granted that stayed, but you look at the modernizing of these theories and how to base on these standards of care, and it's just them wanting to fall in line and not wanting to take any flack. And,
wow.
And
it's that bad?
A lot of those doctors are the type of doctor that can't have a stand-up conversation like you and I and look a patient in the face and say, okay, Unfortunately, you have a pretty serious condition that we have a good chance of, just turning the conversation into that upswing positive method, then reality. Okay, well, you're in the system now. We're going to see you back in 4 months, either in a wheelchair or this, and then you're already into that kind of, all right, I'm in this lane. I'm in this method of thinking. And as soon as you do that, I think that there's a lot of detriment, because you're already starting your mental polarity in a negative state to receive that information.
Absolutely. And we've always heard there's more than meets the eye, right? There's always that idea. And one of the things that I also want to talk to you about was the visible light spectrum, right? Because how many things are going on around our eyes, right? Our you're talking about we're magnetic, right? You're on some Nikola Tesla shit right now, where everything is a force field, everything is energy, right? Which is 100% true. I mean, if you really come to look at it, we're just a bunch of atoms that just so happen to come together and form something solid. But there's actually, if you were to add up all the empty space and all the atoms all throughout the entire world, there's actually more empty space than there is actual filled in space. So we're essentially nothing. But we talk about all these things, and I 100% believe in, again, there's the eye only picks up what 0.0025 of the light spectrum.
400 nanometers.
What is that?
400 to 500 nanometers, which is a sixth of a meter, or ninth of a meter, excuse me. So it's the visible spectrum, like you had said. We only see a good tenth of that, or even that. And you go back into intra versus extra mission. Okay, well, if we know that there's an entire spectrum, right? And I'm going to be in my Tesla gig and say that spectrum is just an entire wave. Okay, one big wave is the reality condensed down to one tiny little wave is a photon. Okay, it's all in the same wave. So when you look at it that way, I think that there's a lot more that can be said about how the electrons and the protons and all these all those come together. So it's as how do you describe a photon? Max Planck said it's a particle of light. There's no particle. You can't look at a piece of light. You know what I mean? You can study it as a wave for sure, and then you look at how that wave can hit other waves and then create a third wave, and we call that excitation. So when you have a wave come in and hit the retina or the back of the eye, it's basically like a big receiver for wireless internet. So it's going to hit that up, and it's going to cause that to create a signal, and that signal is what we call, the term is transduction, but what it does is it lights up and it excites. And that excitation is that photon or that wave hitting that other wave and creating light or a different wave that we see. Okay, well, what if we could make that better? What if we could strengthen that? What if we could use the actual lights that I believe are being cast out by the eye and interact that with the waves that are being built better? And I think that once we get there, you've already said it, cats themselves have such a reflectivity. Tigers, felines and stuff are very good with that. Owls at nighttime, stuff like that. I mean, the sky's the limit. There's a reason that cellular material is similar between species.
And I believe it was lizards have a third eye where I think they see through it as well. They take certain wavelengths or some shit through it too. They have sometimes a whole eye with a retina and everything on the top of their heads. There's a certain type of lizard that does. And we talk about the, pineal gland, how the third eye and all that shit. So I don't know if I asked you, but what are the duties of an optometrist or an eye doctor? Like, obviously there's different ones. There's eye surgeons and all that. But what can you share with the listeners maybe what your duties are as far, do you diagnose, et cetera, et cetera?
Everybody that goes through optometry school is, in my opinion, a form of medical school that goes just to the eye rather than going through the hoops that the full medical school allopathic program puts you through. So, for example, you go through 4 years of undergrad college like you would any other school, and then you apply to either the optometry or the medical school that you want to go to. I already knew that I wanted to be an eye doctor, and I knew that if I went to the allopathic program, that was going to take at least another 8 to 12 years and a lot more student debt. So I knew that the quickest way that I could get into diagnosing, treating, and practicing was to go into optometry school. So I went there for 4 years, and then you can do a year residency where you specialize in a certain part of the eye or not. That is an optional residency. This is different from medical school, where you go through 4 years of just general toes to ears to hairs on your head and everything in between, and then a 4-year residency where you specialize in a part of the body, whether it's a residency in internal medicine, a residency in neurology, a residency in the eyes, which would be ophthalmology. After that residency, if you want to do surgery like retina surgery, glaucoma, cornea, that's another 3 to 4 year fellowship, right? So you're already looking at 15 to 18 years of schooling. So I knew that I could get rid of 7 to 8 years by just going into optometry school. At the time, I just wanted to be an athlete. I was a big football player in college, wanted to just train athletes. Life was good, all that stuff. But then I learned about how you can connect your toes to your eyes, and I can talk to you about your high cholesterol by looking at your eyes, and how all of that connected. And I had some very good mentorship at the time that got me into disease. So I am a medical optometrist. I do basically both of what an general ophthalmologist and a general optometrist does. I can give you glasses and contacts. In certain states, I can do LASIK on you. And then in other areas, I can't. And that is where that division came back in, way back in the 1800s, about who can do what. And there was a Supreme Court decision that came down in the 1920s that said that the states can regulate what optometrists do or not. So for a state like New England, or states in the New England area, for example, they can't even prescribe eye drops. They can just do glasses and contacts. In states like Louisiana is a very progressive one, Arizona and Oklahoma, you can do certain types of laser surgeries, you can do certain types of cataracts, stuff like that. So I was practicing down in Texas, and I stayed there mostly for the scope of practice, because for the last 10 years, I was just in ophthalmology. So I'm a medical optometrist. I was working just with ophthalmologists doing cataract, glaucoma, retina surgeries. Some of those surgeries I was doing myself. For example, I worked at a community clinic right next to a big busy highway. There's a lot of undocumented working activity in Texas, let's say the least. So I saw a lot of workers come off the street or the highways that were grinding concrete that had pieces of concrete stuck in their eyes. So I'd be digging that out of their cornea, suturing it up. I love that. That's what I really liked.
What the fuck, bro?
Yeah. So then I would take that patient, or I'd take your dad, for example. We take a look at his diabetes, and then if he had certain diabetic issues, we do maybe retina surgeries on that, or you can do certain injections in the eyes. So I know it's a very long-winded answer, but it really comes down to how much doctoring you want to do out of school. All of the kids that were way ahead of me grade-wise, that got every single multiple choice answer correct, a lot of them are just working at a Target, and they're just doing glasses and contacts, and they're not using all of the stuff that we learned. I mean, granted, I'm a specialist. I went into disease for 10 years, all that, but all this stuff I'm telling to you because it's basic. And here you are shaking your head that you can understand it. So I don't know if people just don't want to be, put under a microscope, to put a pun on it. But a lot of patients, a lot of doctors act like patients, where they are good at being told what to do, but not think for themselves. And even in that little box, we see it today. How many of these docs are just lockstep, with what the next thing is? And I've been fortunate to not be that type of thinking, I guess. I think I'm finding that out more and more each day. It's burned a lot of bridges in my profession, but that's what you got to do nowadays, I guess. So.
And it's that bad when you go against the narrative and how you're talking about the main practice. They shun you like that. It's a thing where you can openly see it, like, bro, what the fuck's your problem type of thing. Like, why aren't you doing what we're telling you to do?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I left my last practice in Dallas, was because ultimately there were a lot of preliminary frictional things occurring just by the local, for example, when the mask mandate came down. I work with microscopes and I work with glass, and I have to be able to look at very fine material. So mask will just fog up glass, automatically. So when your dad goes in for an exam, they put you on that microscope, and you have to be very still so we can look at things. And it was just horrendous. So I was getting in trouble with my HR staff, the suits in my office telling me how I had to be better presenting to my customers about their safety. And I'm like, bro, your grandma's about to lose her eye due to glaucoma, okay? I want to take my mask down so you can hear that I feel for your grandma's sight, and you're more concerned that I don't have it over my nose. And
you're going to kill her with COVID, bro.
you know, and it's been a personal way of being a doctor, knowing the things I know, and also trying to relay that to the world, and having the TV tell you that exact opposite each day. You know, even today, seeing patients, I have patients that are still wearing masks, and I do telemedicine now, so I do patient care over the phone, and it's like, I don't know, how people think sometimes. I don't think they think. We could get into the NPC theory, but
Yeah, yeah, we definitely can. I wanted to get into we'll get into the anatomy of the eye here in a little bit because I wanted to talk about the Copiale Cipher and obviously what that leads us to with the Oculist Order. So this is what sparked our conversation too, and what I said, hey, this is a crazy document, right? A book. This book with it's like green with gold on it, and it went more than 260 years without being cracked, which is wild. So the Copiale Cipher is an 18th century handwritten encrypted manuscript. Has 105 pages and a combination of 75,000 symbols mixed with Roman and Greek letters. So it went undeciphered for 260 years until 2011. Now, they used quote unquote modern computer techniques, but I see that as AI. Okay, they used some sort of algorithm that was able to recognize the patterns within the letters and the numbers and these symbols, and they didn't get it 100% because there were certain symbols that could have meant anything. I mean, it could have been 100,000 different words, whatever it was, but they got the gist of it. They got the main part of it, and it turns out it's called the homophonic cipher, and it's estimated to go back to the 1760s to 1780. The reason that they narrowed it down to that was because within the manuscript they saw something that was referenced in 1745, and they referenced it in past tense, so they were able to kind of lock it around that date. And it was discovered in the East Berlin Academy after the Cold War, and it is now in a private collection at the time of the writing of this article that I was looking at in different sources, YouTube. And there was really not a lot of stuff on this. Like, if you really looked around, there was maybe a couple videos on it. I was able to find one of the translations on Scribe that I had and look through it, and it was just like a breakdown of everything, like almost word for word. So researchers, they were focused on the Roman and Greek characters, and it turned out that the Roman characters were what they call nulls, and some of them were spaces, right? And in between all that was the symbol was the actual letter. And after the term, how you mentioned earlier, light hand came up, that was cross-referenced, and they were able to narrow it down as to, what it could potentially be. And because of that, they were able to find the Oculist Order, right? They were able to reference it to some secret society. Like, what the fuck, the Oculist Order? And the reason this really caught my eye, bro, if you look at the word Oculist, right? I have the Oculus Rift, right? The VR headset. And if you look at the word Oculist, it looks like a cultist. So that's what really caught me. And honestly, that's what, when I think it was Paranoid American was the one that had sent me the Copiale Cipher a video, the one that I sent you, because I forgot what the fuck me and him were talking about. And he's like, hey, bro, something, or he's like, I think we're on the phone or something. He's like, oh, there was a secret society that was only eye doctors. And I was like, what the fuck? What are we talking about? And he had sent me that. So obviously I went down that rabbit hole. So we now know the cipher was created by a secret society based in Germany known as the High Enlightened Oculist Order of Wolfenbüttel, or just the Oculist. And they were founded by a Count Frederick August von Veltheim in 1742 or 1745, depending where you look. And they called their members high enlightened, and they use sight as a metaphor for knowledge. Okay. And the manuscript consists of 3 different parts, and it had interesting names. The Book of Law, which reminds me of Crowley's The Book of the Law, right? The Book of Law of the Enlightened, and then it has 2 symbols, and then the word secret part. The second one was reliable old news increased by new observations of a symbol, ray. And then third, a seventh chapter about the Matire Ekasois, something like that, some word. So
Mm-hmm.
throughout the three parts, there's various topics that are covered. The initiation ritual for this secret society, rank identifiers, history of the formation of the Oculist, equipment descriptions and explanations, Masonic regalia, practices, and even some what they termed radical political ideas of the time, because we know that according to the history, Pope Clement VII condemned Catholics from becoming Freemasons and eventually banned the secret society by issuing the first papal decree against the Masons on April 28th, 1738. And obviously, we have the various conspiracies, because mind you, this is post uh, Knights Templar. We have the
Mm-hmm.
conspiracies that they were satanic worshippers, they were sodomites, or they were doing, witchcraft. And it's always right, like, the whole thing about secret societies, there's always got to be some butt play in there for some fucking reason. It's
I
always
just
something about the butt that these guys are
that
obsessed with,
that
bro.
that fifth eye thing, dude. Like your
Yeah.
buddy was trying to son or whatever. So.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who, like, he's like, yeah, dude, if it's good to get, you know, sun on your skin, then it's probably good to get sun on your asshole because it never sees the light of day. So he'll go into the woods, lay down, spread his cheeks for a little bit, and he sunbathes his asshole, which is, I mean, more power. You're not hurting anybody. More
Hey
power to
man,
you.
do your thing. Oh boy.
So the members of the Oculist Order who used the manuscript, depending on where you look, some people say that they were actually doctors. Some other people say that they weren't doctors. Depends on where you look, but nonetheless, they were fascinated by eye surgery and by ophthalmology. I hopefully I said that right. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Ophthalmology.
Ophthalmology. And the oculists devoted themselves to ophthalmology and the preoccupation with eyes and seeing. It is reflected in their rituals, regalia, and their logogram, which was like a little eye.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no evidence that they actually conducted any procedures, although there are various pages within the manuscript on the anatomy of the eye and the origins and treatments of eye diseases. So the guy that started it, Mr. Count Frederick August von Veltheim, supposedly, and I was talking to you about it before, I didn't write this down, but he left a trunk behind. And he didn't even let his heir open it up. He said that he needed to get permission from, what was it? What'd you
The
say?
his firstborn son and heir was not allowed to access the trunk and contents of the cipher unless it was given permission by the local duke, whoever that guy was.
The local
So
Duke. What
it,
in
it
the
said the
fuck?
local duke. So
So he left this, and within that, supposedly there was some artifacts, and there was like a model of the eye. You had the what the hell is that shit that they use to scrape the eye? What's it called? The
thing that
Jesus.
they used to scrape the eye.
Yeah, the spike, whatever. It had a bunch of optometrist stuff in there. It had a model of an eye that you could take apart
Yeah,
and all
it had
these
just a
different.
bunch of scalpels. I mean, from the positioning of the material and that picture that you're talking about, all those long pointy things, they only do one thing. They either are going to stick something out from the front of the eye, or you're going to push something into the inside of the eye and push something out of the way, which were basically the two procedures at the time. Which was, if you had good enough eyesight and you could see on the front of the eye and the white or something to remove, you had that little fine piece of metal like the tip of my pen here where you could remove it, and you needed to have that sort of light hand to guide yourself. And then the other longer material that has like the big point, I believe that's what they call a couching instrument. And couching was a type of really early cataract surgery where they literally would just stick that big stick into your eye and they
Does
push
it
the
hurt,
white
bro?
cataract out of the way. So in the colored part of your eye, that's where all the nerve endings are for the cornea, the front surface that clear. On the whites, it gets a little less sensitive depending on how steady of your hand is.
What the fuck? So you can literally
Mm-hmm.
just when you guys are scraping a cataract, are you guys cutting it off or just moving it around?
So what they were doing back then was these cataracts were getting so bad that you looked like your eye was white and cloudy, that it had a cloud in it. And of course, there's varying theories as to what that was called and how that was. But the only way they knew how to get rid of it at the time was to literally push it out of the way, because the way that it's situated in the eye is it's like a window that is hanging in the middle of the eyeball. And after that certain age or nutritional stuff, and nowadays we think it's more UV, of course, but we can get into that. It creates this opaque place that clouds your vision. So you have this vision that is cloudy. You go to this guy, he has a light hand. He pushes the clouds out of your way and you can see the sun again.
Oh,
and the light
shit.
is restored. So that you get
that's
all into this, you know, how they had part of their symbolism was they were the cats watching over the mice. I don't know if you saw that in their
Yeah, that's
one of
their
their
emblem. Mhm.
one of their emblems, and it's pretty interesting because
Their
you
seal.
know their seal. How many meanings could you apply to that? You have the big, you know, regalia of the feline, the lions, the cats, you know, the crest of the Tartaria, for example, looking over the piddly mice in the cage of reality that they put them in by pushing that out of their way. Had they not, they would just be blind for the rest of it.
Yeah, I have here, since the cats have the ability to see in the dark, it's symbolic for them being able to see or know, because they regarded sight as knowledge, right? So they knew, they were able to see, see through the bullshit and see the actual knowledge for what it was. But I like the way you put it, where they're able to push the cloud out of the way, and let the person see. And one of their procedures was, they would put this person in a room, they would sit down, and they would make them read in the dark, right? This blank sheet of paper, and the guy would be like, "Hey, I can't fucking read," because obviously it's blank and you can't see it. So they would put, I think it would, like, they had some little goggles or some shit. So they put little goggles on, and then would switch the paper and look at and tell homeboy to read. Or I think it was after they plucked one of the eyebrows.
Plucked an eyebrow out.
Yeah, plucked an eyebrow, whatever it was. It wasn't meant to be an actual surgery, but it was meant to be symbolic. So they plucked the eyebrow, they put on the goggles or whatever it was. It was like some little stupid looking goggles. And they're like, "Hey, read this paper that actually had stuff on it." So when homeboy was like, "Oh, now I can read." So now, you're ready to do whatever the fuck it is that they do, which obviously, I mean, it probably involved butts and a bunch of gay shit. I mean, that's what the whole, the
Something
Knights
with it, man.
Templar. And nothing against the gays, right? Whatever, do what thou will, or whatever it is that you people say, or some shit,
It's
But
all the wave, right? I guess. I don't know.
the
So,
Knights Templar, they had the two knights on a horse, right? So that was the whole thing with them. It was like, when they were accused of sodomy and Baphomet and all this shit, the two men on a horse was a homosexual type of thing. That was like, "Hey, your brethren. Well, you're supposed to take your sexual urges out on your brethren. You can't take it out on the women." It's like, what the fuck? Like, what do that was, yeah, bro. This is crazy as fuck. So the
yeah.
the the aim and purpose and objectives of the Oculist Society aren't clear, right? We don't know why they were formed, and apparently this was a parallel text to another text I read. There was a second book, right? This wasn't a one-off. It was, a book that supposedly a Philip kept. The guy's name was in the book. It was Philip or Felipe or something like that. And, probably was somebody who was a part of the order and wanted to keep notes or something like that. So historians determined that the members of the Oculist Order were Freemasons, because, mind you, this was post-ban of the Freemasons, and who had established a society to pass down Masonic rites, because it does get into explicit details about Masonic regalia and practices and initiations and whatnot. And the true and most secret teaching of the lodge, passed on to the masters only, was knowledge about the history of Freemasonry and about Masonic rituals and activities. So at the end of the day, it was a Freemasonic movement. And the quote-unquote masterpiece of a master of the Oculist Lodge, the proof of his true light hand, was the ability to read and write cipher script. So it wasn't even about being a fucking doctor. It wasn't even about being able to scrape things off of people's eyes and have this crazy, precision. It was about being able to write, which, I mean, the guy who wrote this shit was good. I mean, 260 years it wasn't decoded, and it had to be decoded with man and a computer. You know what I mean? To be able to do something like that, I think that's magic in itself, because homeboy was on some other shit. You know what I mean?
I think also too, you know, when you look at the eye doctors created the cipher that is the hardest to create, because hopefully they would be able to make you look one way but really be looking a different way, or be looking at one letter and think it's another letter. So I think it's fascinating that the hardest cracked cipher that we have right now was created by a bunch, hopefully, of eye doctors that were doing their job and not working at the local Target. And we were talking a lot about this previous, about, you know, how little was known about this, what their real intentions were, how much they have to really reveal. And I think that there's a lot more to these guys in particular, just because of how much they placed on the eye. Because after this, you have the all-seeing eye, you know, of Freemasonry come up. So I wonder what their predication was for this, the eye.
So I have here why the eye. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the eyes are the window to the soul. We talked about the observer effect earlier today, earlier in this episode, about how observing something has an effect on the outcome. So when you look at a certain atom, right, you had the double slit experiment where the atom observed differently when it was being watched versus when it wasn't being watched. So is it conscious? Is the atom, is the particle conscious? Because I mean, that's the only way you could really interpret that. And you know, one of the hermetic principles, you know, as above, so below. I've always said, if we're not able to, because we don't know, right? You get a Nobel Peace Prize if you're able to explain why the atom acts differently when it's being observed versus when it's not. But as above, so below, right? Because if this happens at a molecular level, it can happen on a grander scale. And that's what the whole theosophical movement and all this stuff was about Helena Blavatsky and all them, where it was that we are mini cosmos, you know, in the bigger, if you want to believe in space. And, you know, you have the macrocosm and microcosm. So if things are able to change metaphysics, it's fucking magic. You know, it's quantum physics and all that shit. If it's able to change on a atomic level, like, you know, if you're watching an atom, who's to say it can't happen again, as above, so below? So it's happening in the smaller scale. Zoom out to the macro. It can happen with us. You know what I mean? This is what the occultism and all these different practices are, where they say that man is able to attain a certain power, you know, extracurricular power that you wouldn't otherwise have if you didn't meditate. You know, you have the Kundalini with the serpent opening up your third eye, which we'll get into. But in theology, divine providence, or providence, is God's intervention in the universe, the divine watchfulness of the supreme being taking care of the entire universe. In Christian iconography, the eye surrounded by a triangle represents the Christian Trinity, God's omnipresence, and divine providence, which I just mentioned what that was. And the icon is still used in church architecture and Christian art today. So if you go to a lot of these different places, you will have the eye, you know, in a church, and it's supposed to be, you know, if you're Christian, the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and God's eye just peeking through and looking, because He's always watching. I mean, that's the whole thing. When I was, he's like Santa Claus. You know, when I grew up, it was, you know, He's watching everything you're doing, which is kind of fucked up and weird if you really think about it.
When
You
you
have the
listen to,
concept of the watchers in all these ancient scriptures, right?
uh
You have the concept of in the Picatrix, which is a book on talismanic magic. The watchers are these entities that you summon to watch over your body while you're traveling in the astral plane. And I like that interpretation of the watchers, because I had never heard it before.
I haven't heard
And
that.
I also like the alchemical watcher, where the alchemist, you know, we have Enoch that was up in
Mm-hmm.
the heavens with El, Yahweh, whoever, God,
Mm-hmm.
and they're watching the divine alchemist at work. So they're watchers of the divine alchemist at work. And so I like, there's different interpretations of the watchers within different cosmologies, and a lot of this started with the Egyptians. It was the Eye of Horus or Ra, and you have the two different eyes. The Eye of Horus is the one that, you know, Crowley and all these guys talked about. It talks about different energies, and then you have the other eye, right? And in their cosmology, their god gets his eye gouged out and all this crazy
Mm-hmm.
shit. but it's pretty much the yin and the yang. So you have both eyes, the eye of Horus and the eye of Ra, and it's just yin and yang. So again, it's everywhere. For the Hebrews, they spoke of the watchful eyes of the Lord. I think it was Metatron had 365 eyes after he was done becoming Metatron. We have in Hinduism, it is the Lord Shiva's third eye. In Buddhism, Buddha is known as the eye of the world. And you mentioned earlier give me one sec. You mentioned earlier the Freemasons and the Illuminati, right? Where this sign wasn't adopted. It was adopted in 1782 as symbolism for the Great Seal of the U.S. And it wasn't used by the Freemasons until 14 years after that. So who came up with it? I don't know. You know what I mean? They say that the depiction of that right behind, especially behind the $1 bill, is that the Freemasons were, they had taken over and had infiltrated. I think if anything, the founding fathers were more Rosicrucians than anything, more than Freemasons or any other Illuminati or whatever you want to call it. I think it was because the Bavarian Illuminati was in 1776. So 1782 here. I don't know, dude.
I mean, you look at the timing of the major contributions to optometry, and that was all coming out of Germany. German optics, Zeiss, Helmholtz, von Graeff, all these optical shops you hear today, those all came out of Germany, Austria, all that congealment of activity that was going on during those times, less what we're talking about now. And then you find, okay, well, after that, you got some of the big names coming from Germany over here and starting up their own optical gigs. And that's kind of how it came out, was from that Germanic, influential, Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, group of people that started all this stuff. And you go back into the symbolism, not only is the triangle a symbol of all of what you just described, but it is also a metaphor for your two eyes at the base and then your pineal gland at the top of the triangle. That then connects you up. If you study, Vedic texts and stuff like that, of how you're supposed to meditate, when you put your hands on your head, that creates a magnetic polarity between the two and shoots it up. So I think that's really cool. And then you look at the dollar bill, how that part of the triangle is separate, because you and I are on the base level with only our two eyes, and they have the third eye that's separate from everybody else. And that really goes into, well, how do we learn more about all this, and how do we figure more of it out? And it goes back into that pineal gland stuff. And
if you read, I'll send you some stuff here after the show. You have Manly P. Hall. He talks about the pyramid symbolism, which is very interesting because it's supposed to signify man. And you said that the capstone on this pyramid is separated from the rest, right? And there's a lot of symbols that people use or see all throughout history or all throughout society that really they don't know what it means. And I mean, a big part of alchemy is literally just symbols, and it's knowledge that's supposed to be shrouded within mystery. I mean, look at this cipher. It lasted 260 years for some initiations for whatever it was that they thought that they were going to achieve through that. That's on them and their teachings, but you have this all throughout history. And I mean, alchemy, for one of them, is very fascinating because everything is, it could be whatever you want. If you could turn lead into gold, then, I'm sure there's a way to do it. If, that meant on a spiritual level, turning lead into gold and becoming a higher line and purifying yourself, that's also another way of interpreting it. But that's what's beautiful about it, because it's symbols. And you can interpret it however you want. So we have here the eye of providence symbol is depicted by an eye within a triangle with the rays of light of glory emanating from it. It is meant to represent the divine providence and symbolize the eye of God watching over humanity, and has been used since ancient times by various cultures. Obviously, though, we mentioned already, the best example is the one on the back side of the Great Seal, which is printed on the back of the United States $1 bill. And the Eye of Providence was adopted in 1782 as part of the symbolism. At the time, it was a conventional symbol for God's benevolent oversight. And since then, it's been featured on various American seals and logos, such as the good people at DARPA, their Information Awareness Office, And I was looking through some of their programs. They have a program named Babylon as well. So I thought that was really fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
And other countries that have that have adopted the symbol, of course, Ukraine, Poland, Brazil, different states as well have adopted this. And the eye is associated with Freemasonry uh, because it first appeared as part of the standard Freemasonic iconography in 1797 by a fellow named Thomas Smith Webb. He published what's called the Freemasonic Monitor, and it's like pretty much a book for teaching the candidates or the initiates of the exoteric stuff, regalia and different things like that within the association. And he printed that and used that symbol in there in 1797. That was one of the first times they ever saw the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, within the Freemasonic organization, if you will. And in Freemason, it's supposed to represent the all-seeing eye of God. It serves as a reminder that humanity's thoughts and deeds are always observed by God, who is referred to as the great architect of the universe. So, and then they have, I think his name is Sharif Harim or something like that, the guy that died and became, his body became the Temple of Solomon. Some crazy fucking shit, like the divine artificer. I don't know. I'll have to ask
That's the
Thomas.
divine artificer thing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll have to ask Thomas. He's the Freemason of the group. I haven't been initiated yet. So, although conspiracy theories claim that the Eye of Providence is evidence that Freemasonry influenced the founding of the U.S., Masonic usage of the eye dates to 14 years after the creation of the Great Seal. So I put make what you will of that, because, like I said, I think that the guys that were in charge of this country were more Rosicrucians in nature than anything. I think, was it Thomas Jefferson? I think that's the one. I get Thomas Edison and Jefferson mixed up. Edison was the one with Tesla that created electricity. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson was one of the founding fathers. Mm-hmm. So I got to make that connection. But I think he was one of the Freemasons in the group, and supposedly, allegedly, he had given some, I guess, Freemasonic idea for the group when it was like a committee coming together to pick the Great Seal, and his idea was rejected. So I don't know if he probably wanted to put something else on there, maybe the Freemasonic compass or something, but I don't know. And so we have the concept of the Watchers, which I mentioned earlier, and a lot of people think that it's a literal eye or something, but there's a literal comprehension to these sort of things, and there's a mystical comprehension. So in alchemy, ergon was adopted from the Egyptian eye of Ra and repurposed into the right eye of the soul, which was believed to keep an eye on the human souls and guide their abilities into attaining high spiritual purposes. In the Hermetic philosophies, the eye is considered as the link between the earthly and spiritual realms or dimensions, and believe one can obtain prophetic messages and visions through it, predicting the future. So you have magic such as divination and things like that, where you're able to see visions and reading tea leaves or whatever the fuck it is that you like to do. And so here the eye is not a physical symbol, but an ethereal one, in which consciousness may enter into a gateway of infinite expanse. So this is where you get the third eye, right? The pineal gland, and all these, in Freemasonic iconography, you have the frontal sinus, which is said to keep the soul, right? There's a gaseous thing in there which is supposed to be the soul, and that's why some cultures put the dot on the top here. It's supposed to be, Manly P. Hall puts it that the pineal gland, right? Because obviously, you being a doctor, you know that the body. I don't have my appendix anymore. I had an appendectomy when I was 7 or 8. My appendix actually ruptured. It didn't. It got inflamed and actually broke. It popped. Mm-hmm. We know that the body doesn't keep. Through evolution, if you want to believe in evolution, it doesn't keep organs that are useless, right? So it keeps evolving. And they said that through the development of our two eyes in the Lemurian times, when the giants and all this shit were on Earth, our pineal gland was actually like an antenna. And if little babies, their skulls don't finish joining until about the age of 7, right? So we know that little kids are more susceptible to certain things. That's how you get the whole QAnon shit and the sacrificing kids to Moloch and all this stuff, because they're the closest to the source that we're ever gonna get, because they're the purest. You know what I mean? So they say up until the age of, in these times before our eyes were developed where they are, we had this antenna that came
Hmm.
from the, from this area of the head and protruded out. And that was, we were more susceptible to spirituality and all this shit.
Hmm.
But then with time, it got pushed back into the brain, and it's still there. You know what I mean? It's still there. We don't know what the fuck it's for, but it happens to look like an eye and all this shit. So the third eye is a mystical and esoteric invisible eye. This eye has a heightened extrasensory perception beyond ordinary sight. It is a spiritual concept related to enlightenment and direct communication with higher states of consciousness or higher planes of existence. So again, there's people who take psychedelics, and they say that they're able to unlock that third. I've had a friend of mine tell me that he's had his third eye forced open and he was able to, see into like a spirit realm. He was doing 5-MeO DMT, and the craziest shit about 5-MeO is they call them, forgot the name of it, but you can have like a relapse almost where the effect comes back. It's random. It comes back and it can last as long as you want it to last, or as long as it'll last, and it can happen to
Hmm.
you whenever the fuck. Like a certain time after you do the toad, you can experience like I forgot the name of it, but like pretty much like a relapse, and I'm like, that's scary as fuck. Because what if you're driving?
Yeah. I
You ever done
mean,
DMT, bro?
you go, nah, man. I stay to just the plants that grow from the ground, and the stuff on the back of frogs. I'm going to leave for the experts. But you bring up a lot of good points because that third eye is actually retinal tissue. So if you dissect the pineal gland and you look at the back of the retina, those cells are the same. It is
What?
absolutely a receiver of magnetic and electrical polarity. And you look at
Seriously?
the innermost activity of the pineal gland, and it's actually miniature crystals. So I don't know, back with when we were talking about Tesla, he talks as my brain is only a receiver, and I
Mm-hmm.
believe that wholeheartedly. That it's we're just kind of plugged in here in a way, beamed in, and that's kind of what's moving me around here in a way. We can get into that, but the point is yes, there was some anatomical studies back. If you push right here, there's pressure relieving mantras that you can do. If you have sinus headaches, you're told to push here, and that is creating a pressure and balance between the muscular activity in your head. So then you go further back into that, and if you know what piezoelectricity is, it's miniature electrical charges that are created basically to keep your body running. And there's a lot of piezoelectric activity within the pineal gland. So I believe that is where the key is. Once we figure out where this electricity happens and how it is activating these miniature crystals, crystals are an amazing thing. Tesla talks about how they're living. I think there's a lot of applications in laser therapy with them because if you shoot one of our photons into a crystal, you exponentially magnify the power
Whoa.
of that wave. So if I go and I put a crystal in front of you and I do an eye surgery, it is light years more cellularly gentle because I can carve out that piece of rock on a cellular or subcellular level, whereas I'm just using a scalpel and I'm being very abrasive with it. So there's a lot of potential that those crystals that are up here play with that increased electroactivity. And the one thing that increases that between the two sides of the brain is marijuana. It's been shown to have more of a synthetic effect of the right brain, sort of more mathematic, and the left brain sort of more of artistic capabilities. So when you have that, that goes into those, psychedelics of higher levels of consciousness, being able to see more. Maybe they're just turning that pineal gland and they're opening up that spectrum that we talked about. And that is what you're seeing. Maybe you're not into a different realm. Maybe your third eye wasn't forced open. Maybe it was opened in a way that now you can experience more of that larger wave.
Yeah, and I like the way that, what was it? Alan Moore puts it. He puts it that, reality is sort of building blocks, right? And I just picture Legos, and it's just like that. Sometimes there's cracks, that you can see through whatever it is. And I also heard it put the other way. I forgot who I was listening to, where maybe I'm able to pick up a certain frequency that you're not able to pick up, right? And vice versa, because we are all different. You have the haplogene X group where they're more susceptible to metaphysical and spiritual experiences. Maybe their spectrum of light that they're able to pick up is at a different level than mine. But that's crazy, the crystals, how they're able to amplify and you're able, that's fucking
That's
so wild to me, dude.
if we do it right, that's the next level of what we should be experiencing in terms of medical improvements and stuff, whether or not the petroleum system is going to come around to it. But optics-based crystal light therapy and wavelength-based spectrum therapy of shooting that photon at that frequency you were talking about, matching the vibrational frequency of the defect. When you find that frequency that matches the defect's frequency, you get rid of the defect.
Well,
And it's
because
just
if you look at everything, everything is right disease. It's a disease. So if you're able to match the frequency, how you're saying, you're able to either calm it or get rid of it or cancel it out in some way or shape or form. Because if I'm able to, tune my hand to the frequency of this desk, I'm able to put my hand through it. So yeah, absolutely, and that's mind blowing. What you were saying about the pineal gland and the back of the eye. You're saying that it's the same tissue that's found within the back of the eye. It's found on the pineal gland.
You have retinal cellular tissue on your pineal surface as well as the concave surface of the retina. And it's the same light activity, which is called scotopic or photopic. When your cat's eyes light up, from an infrared spectrum, you can actually, on certain individuals, get a little bit of reactivity here. And there's a lot of that you can do in retinal imaging where, remember I talked about transduction, you excite those cells and then you can map that color change. So if I put a certain frequency of light into the retinal tissue and I excite it, I can take a picture of that. And that's what I want to try to do here and try to map that reflectivity.
What the fuck, bro? I've heard of
cool
biophotons that the brain emits actual light. Even if it's on a molecular level, it still emits some light. And, you have different theories.
The DNA phantom effect? Have you heard about that?
No.
Okay, this one's pretty cool. So I don't know how much science is in this because there were some dudes like David Wilcock. I don't know if you really follow him, but that's how I got into it.
You like that guy, bro?
He was one of the first. He was one of the first people that I kind of jumped into way before I found my way to you guys that are legit, basically. But I was reading some light therapy stuff that he did, and he worked with a different guy. Let me pull his name up so I get it right. But it's called
Tom
DNA.
Tom loves that guy.
Oh,
I
really?
fucking hate him. I think he's just.
I'm not. I don't know what I feel about him, but he brought this to my attention, which was pretty cool. So it was observed in Moscow, right? And what you can do is essentially take light and you shoot it at a DNA, okay? And you can visualize a double helix of DNA, and that will cause cells on the DNA to excite and to emit light. So when you excite that DNA and you emit its light, it then creates a shadow of the double helix. So they're saying that you can create that shadow into a different cell using light because it's going to map that double helix structure. So you're basically shooting that cell's DNA shadow into a different cell. And now the weird thing is they were able to mimic that cellular helix. They said they were able to detect that light for about 30 days afterwards. So it's interesting stuff. It all goes back into how you can excite these cells and create that light and increase that spectrum. And when you talk about mapping DNA and stuff, it's like, well, how do we know it was a double helix? Because Watson and Crick took LSD and then had this experience, or did they have that spectrum opened up more and they were able to see it themselves based off of that? You know what I mean? So.
You ever heard of Paul Benjamin Blood?
I've not heard of him.
I'm covering him tomorrow with Thomas on the Occult Book Club, and he wrote a book. He pretty much super obscure. I mean, this is like the early, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s. And homeboy was taking a bunch of nitrous and studying philosophy. And according to him,
that's the secret. There you
go. He was able to have these epiphanies and understand things that he wouldn't otherwise understand. But I can just imagine this guy with a fucking tank of nitrous oxide in his room. Dude, they would fill up entire rooms with nitrous oxide, go in there and just
hop off.
Bro. Yeah, hotbox and just be high as fuck and then just write everything down and just they would, bro. He was he was writing like next level shit, bro. Like that's what we're gonna cover tomorrow. This episode, I think that episode will be out before this one, but they were just he was just having these breakthroughs, bro, and just talking just some crazy shit. He talks about how ideas are alien energy and all this craziness, bro. It's fucking wild. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. So, dude, I think this fucking episode was great, man. I think you brought a lot of insight, especially from a medical
Thank
point of
you.
view. I think you're a really interesting guest. For this
Thank
being
you.
your first podcast, you did great, bro.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm just happy to be here. It's a breath of fresh air to be able to talk to individuals that can share some like understanding like this. They're hard to find nowadays. So
I don't know if you want to plug your social media or something. I mean, I'm sure that people would be interested to talk to you or have you on their podcast after I put this out, because that's usually how that works. If you have an interesting guest who knows their shit, they're gonna want to have you on their show. I don't know if you have social media or you want
I
to make one and plug it
I
later or something. You don't have to.
have a you can direct message me on a burner Instagram that I use. It's just JMS_OD. My two credentials that you have there. You can shoot me an email at jjjon1313 at AOL.com. Yes, that was made in 6th grade, and I still use it. And I'd love to be on and talk more with you or whomever that just wants to have a conversation, because, like I said, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to conversate this way. So.
Well, I'm sure that a couple of the guys are gonna want to have you on after they listen to this. So,
Perfect,
thank you
man.
for coming on, brother. I
Hey,
appreciate you, man. I had a great time. This is really insightful, and we'll definitely plan to do another one very soon.
I'm happy to be on the next time for you, sir. And hey, best of luck this week coming in with the new dad, and I hope everything goes well with that.